Hello, my name is Michael Willoughby. I am a CFA charter holder and an economics professor at the University of California, San Diego. I earned my Ph.D. in economics from Columbia University about 20 years ago. Today I'm going to help you with global economic analysis for CFA Level 1. We begin global economic analysis with world trade, and we'll talk briefly about why nations trade, how they do so, and how they benefit by that. Trade is conducted between nations in order to help each nation specialize and benefit from its own specialization. Specialization means, in an economic context, taking advantage of comparative advantage. Comparative advantage is a relative term. Like all things in economics, we need to look at the actual costs of decisions relative to the alternatives. So we think in trade terms about specialization, and specialization in the context of what we do best relative to our own choices, not compared to other countries directly. So we have the concepts of absolute advantage and comparative advantage. Let me give you an example that might be easy to remember so that you can understand how nations might trade the products that they sell to each other. Let's imagine a lawyer who, before becoming a lawyer, was a house painter, a good house painter. So this lawyer is currently a practicing attorney who sells his time for something like $200 an hour. Formerly, he was a house painter. Now, as an attorney, he needs his house painted. Let's imagine that there's a house painter. The house painter, other than the attorney, is someone who he may trade with. And this particular individual paints houses professionally now. But imagine that that house painter is not quite the level of house painter that the attorney is. House painters are paid $50 an hour. So the question is, given the fact that the lawyer is a better house painter than the house painter he can hire, does he paint his house? He has an absolute advantage in house painting over the house painter, and he has an absolute advantage in practicing law over the house painter. What does he do? What choices does he make? Well, comparative advantage says, don't look at the fact that you're a better house painter than the house painter that you can hire, but ask yourself, what are you not doing when you're painting your house? And the answer is, when the lawyer is painting his house, he's not being a lawyer. So the actual cost of painting his own house is a savings of $50 that he might pay the house painter, but a cost of $200 not practicing law. It in fact costs the lawyer $150 an hour to paint his own house. So what does he do? He trades with the house painter. The house painter comes over and paints his house. He practices law. Now, instead of a cost of $150 for the time he would spend painting his house, he has a benefit of $150. That's comparative advantage. I've given you a narrative explanation of comparative advantage. Let me give you a graphical one. It's not going to use lawyers and house painters. It's just going to use generic economies, two of them, and I'll show you how we can graphically identify the gains from trade between two different economies. Let's look at this illustration. A bit complicated. I'll use colors to try to help you out here, but let's imagine that we have a space of only two goods, just like we did with our house painter and our lawyer. I'm using F and C, thinking of an agricultural subsistence economy. Let's imagine that there are only two goods in the world, fish and coconuts. And there are two islands or two economies where the production of fish and coconuts occur, but each of these two islands are different. One of the islands let's take this one first and call it Island A, and I've just outlined its production function, that is, the combination of fish and coconuts that this island can produce, maximum of this amount of fish, maximum of this amount of coconuts if it does only one of the two, or combinations of fish and coconuts here. And you should be able to see that Island A has an advantage in terms of its ability to produce coconuts. If it does nothing but coconuts, this is the maximum amount of coconuts it can produce. If it does nothing but fish, this is the maximum amount of fish. This island is a good farming island, but not a good fishing island. Just the opposite is Island B. On Island B, if all that's done is fishing, the amount of fish that can be obtained is much greater than the amount of fish that can be obtained from Island A, but fewer coconuts. So the production possibilities frontier for Island B is there. Given both of these islands, depending on the preferences of the people, you can imagine that if the people on Island B who have lots of fish and few coconuts want to eat a balanced diet, they have to give up quite a bit of fish to get just a few coconuts to have that balanced diet. The sacrifice in fish is very great for a few coconuts, and the opposite is true of Island A. They have mostly coconuts, so if they want a balanced diet, they have to give up a lot of coconuts to get a few fish. Since these two islands have nearly opposite types of endowments in terms of fish and coconuts, both islands can benefit from trading, where fish is scarce on Island A and fish is plentiful on Island B. A trade of fish there can benefit B, and a trade of coconuts can benefit B if they take coconuts from A. Now, one way to look at this is to ignore the individual economies and think of these two islands as comprising the world economy, in which case we can go out here and say, what is an amount, the maximum amount of fish and coconuts that the world economy enjoys? And what I've done here is just to look at imagine that the price of fish and coconuts, if the amounts that can be produced jointly are the same, we can imagine that the price of fish and coconuts is going to be 1 to 1. And this line here represents a price ratio of 1 fish for 1 coconut. If that was true, then Island B would produce lots of fish, not all the fish it could produce, but quite a few fish, a few coconuts, but where the rate of substitution, the slope of substituting out of fish and into coconuts is exactly equal to this 1 to 1 ratio. Conversely, where the 1 to 1 ratio of fish and coconuts is exactly equal to the rate of substitution along the possibilities frontier of giving up coconuts for fish on Island A. Let's pick those 2 points as well as the maximum points, and what we can see is that if we take coconuts from A and fish from B, the combination the world produces is this amount of fish and coconuts. Actually, the maximum that can be produced, if each maximize their advantages, their absolute advantages, is this amount of fish and coconuts here. Notice that the world production of fish and coconuts, maximum or optimized by finding these 2 points where the rates of substitution are equal to the 1 to 1 price ratio, is outside of the possibilities for production for both economies. What that means is that each of the 2 islands can now have a balance of fish and coconuts, 2 times this, which is exactly using the most that can be produced